Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I am your host, obviously, David Blackmon. Happy to be here today with our friend, Larry Schweikart, America's history teacher, author of a series of wonderful, excellent books. You can see the details behind them. The Patriots' History of Globalism, Patriots' History of the United States, I think are the two. Well, the History of the United States, a bestseller, right?
It's in its 43rd printing.
Yeah. Amazing. 43 printings of one book. And the Patriots' History of Globalism is the most recent book you've published. You had a series of others before these.
Yep.
And Larry is one of my favorite experts on election politics, and it's always great to catch up with you every Monday. This, I believe, is our 5th episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go at least through the election. We'll see what we do after the election. There may be plenty of reason to keep it going after the election
Let's
is
hope
coming
not.
up. Yeah, I wish not, but I'm afraid that's going to be the case. We've had a ton of developments. I'm just last thing. Stu Turley can't be with us today. He's having to take care of some other business. So Larry and I are here alone, and we're not going to have any of the video entertainment that Stu brings to us every week. Unfortunately, I was not able to tee anything up for the episode, but we'll be back in full force next week. Today, we're going to talk about, so many developments have happened in recent days related to the election. The big breaking news this morning is this mayor, a Muslim mayor of Hamtramck, Michigan, put out an endorsement of Donald Trump for the campaign. Larry, what is going on with that?
Well, the Muslims up in Michigan and Minnesota are not happy with Joe Biden because they don't think he's sufficiently anti-Semitic, which is a little mind-boggling given that he's one of the most anti-Semitic presidents we've ever had.
Yeah.
But I think also underlying that there is everywhere this erosion of the economy, of people's paychecks, of their ability to get houses. It was a big deal last week that the Fed cut 50 rate points. Oh, gee, that means mortgages are only going to be 7% now instead of 7.5 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I got my house at 2.9%. So that's how far.
Yeah, I'm at 2.75 on mine.
Yeah, this is like 6 years ago. And that's how far we've fallen in 6 years, that younger home buyers are totally priced out.
Yeah.
And so are poorer people. So I'm sure that weighed on his decision that we can't have 4 more years of this administration with its destructive capabilities.
Yeah. Well, Tim Walz himself said that yesterday, right? During his speech. He said we can't have 4 more years of this. And yeah, he's right.
Yeah, he's right.
I totally agree with him on one thing. Who knew there would be one thing I agree with him about? I agree with you. I mean, young home buyers. I have a son who would love to be able to buy a home, but at 7%, it's and an average new home cost in Texas is pushing $300,000 now. You finance that at 30 years at 7.5%, you're paying $2,500, $3,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
On a house and that's essentially the same payment we have on a house that has double that value, just because of interest rates. So it's that is one aspect of this inflation that we've had over the past few years, is that is really crushing the American dream for Gen Z and millennials, and somehow that has to be recovered. I'm not sure either political party is sustainable unless we're able to recover the ability of these younger generations to pursue that dream of homeownership.
Well, housing has changed a great deal. I'm writing a new book, America in the 21st Century, and I just completed my chapter called Lent Declin, which is the chapter on the economics since 2000, and the whole Big Short, the whole housing boom and bust. And from about 1960 to about 2000, you could buy a house and it would appreciate almost every single year. so
Yes.
that if you decided you wanted to move, you could always sell that for much more than what you paid for it and get a bigger or better house. Or if you wanted to downsize, have money left over. That's no longer the case. And despite these shows like Flip This House, it's very hard with these interest rates, as you mentioned, to buy a house and then flip it and move somewhere else. Our house in Arizona, we bought in 2016 when we moved here, and it's more than doubled in price. That's great, right? Well, no, because if we sold it today at more than double what we paid for it, we couldn't afford to move into a house of similar size and value because of the inflation that Biden has foisted on this country. Now, as to the political parties, you're right. We see no focus in either party on actually trying to contain the growth of the size of government, the growth of budgets, let alone try and cut them. And I see people all the time, the doomers, going, "Oh, we'll never get out from this debt." Well, after World War I, Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge in 7 years chopped 1/3 off the national debt. Andrew Jackson completely erased the national debt. He had some help, but it can be done. You just need a focus on actually doing it.
Yeah. And economic growth. I mean, Bill Clinton in 1994 put out a 10-year budget projection with projecting $200 billion deficits from now on. And within a year, the budget was balanced just due mainly to economic growth.
Right.
And had a balanced budget for four straight years before we started all the deficit spending again.
In fact, in Clinton's last year, I think it was 2000, we actually had a very small budget surplus, which is utterly unheard of today.
Yeah. Crazy, and it wasn't, you didn't have to resort to draconian budget cutting measures. If we would just reduce the federal budget discretionary spending 1% each year in real terms over the next 10 years, the budget would be rebalanced again and we'd be paying off part of the national debt. So it doesn't require really draconian changes. It just requires the will of majorities in both houses of Congress to agree to something, which unfortunately is something we've apparently lost in this country these days.
Well, there's administrative changes that absolutely must be made within Congress. The most important is this notion of baseline budgeting.
Yeah.
And for people who aren't familiar with this, you run a business and you say, well, what do I need to run my business this year? You don't go, what did I run it on last year? Oh, I had a super good year and I'm going to add 5% more this year. You don't do that. You say, what do I need this year? And you look at all of your expenditures, whether or not they're necessary. Well, we advertised over here last year, but we don't need to do that this year. So you cut that out.
Yeah.
What baseline budgeting does is it takes the budget from the previous year as a starting point and just assumes all that money needs to be spent, and we're going to go up from there. If we reformed that to the point where every agency had to defend their budget and say, we need this money for X, Y, Z, and assume that there's going to be some cuts and things that you no longer need, that alone would make major changes in how we spend our money.
It'd be huge, yeah. And of course, the other aspect of that is Congress, with the House of Representatives, would have to get back to actually enacting appropriations bills, 12 appropriations bills to make up a real budget for the federal government each year, which is something they've only achieved once in the last 20 years.
That was the Ryan budget, right?
Right. And they did it one time, and then they stopped doing it again. This year, the new speaker, Mr. Johnson, he made a promise that they'd get the 12 appropriations bills done. I think they got 4 of them done. I believe they got 4 done. And then the rest are left unfinished. So we're going to have another continuing resolution at the end of this month, and the Republicans are going to cave in on every demand the Democrats make in the Senate. And, and then we'll get maybe 4-month continuing resolution for the new Congress to take up in January.
Well, we're eventually going to be down to 1 month continuing resolutions if we keep this up.
Yeah.
And the most recent one, the House had attached, I think it's called the SAVE, S-A-V-E Act. SAVE or SAFE, S-A-F-E, SAVE?
SAVE, yeah, V-E. Yeah.
And this was a bill that said that, if you're here illegally, you don't get to vote. Only citizens get to vote. common sense, ridiculously common sense. But no, the Democrats didn't want that. And Johnson caved again because we don't want to shut down the government. We can't shut down the government. Oh my God, what would happen if you can't get into a national park? And I tracked this back as a historian to Newt Gingrich. Gingrich was a very good speaker for a few months. And he got into it with Bill Clinton over the government shutdown, and he caved because they were running nasty commercials about him, the Gingrich who killed Christmas or something like that. And from that point on, Republicans have been totally gun shy about any threat whatsoever to shut down the government. And so you can always beat them by saying, well, you know, they're going to shut down the government. Oh, no, here, take it. We'll give you whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Before we go on, good morning to Bailey Midkiff. Everyone, if you're watching, you have questions, comments, please chime in. I believe Mr. Midkiff either lives in New Mexico, Colorado, or Wyoming, judging from that comment. Good morning, Bailey. I think that's where I-25 is, isn't it? Yeah. So next thing, let's go to Virginia, because we had a really interesting poll over the weekend in Virginia showing Harris up by only 2 points over Trump in this state that I've, over the past several cycles, considered to be Republican fool's gold. And, you know, you shouldn't spend any time there because it's always going to go Democrat in Lexington and Arlington at the end of the day. However, you have some very encouraging real data on the ground that indicates maybe the Trump campaign should be spending some money in Virginia.
Well, we also had a poll over the weekend that had the state tied at 45.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
Yeah. So this is,
okay.
And prior to that, we had 3 polls that were either tied or had Trump up 1. So out of the last 7 or 8 polls in Virginia, many of them have the race a dead heat. Now, Virginia, like many states, we have to kind of do a primer every time we talk about this. Many states, such as New Mexico, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they register by party. So when you register, you're putting down that you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. Yeah. Many states, Texas, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Virginia, do not register by party. And the reason this is important is it takes away a very valuable metric we have as to where people are leaning. For example, here in Arizona, the Republicans have gained a net almost 164,000 over Democrats in Maricopa County alone since 2020. That's a huge change. That's more than the whole state had an advantage in 2020. But we've seen similar Republican gains, not at that same level, but constant gains of Republicans over Democrats in New Mexico, in California, in Georgia, in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania.
Florida,
yeah. Every place that you can measure, even places like California, we've seen Republicans gain against the Democrats in terms of registrations, and some have been rather significant. I think Florida by November will come in close to 1 million net Republicans over Democrats. That's pretty, which means no, Florida is not in play, and no, the race isn't even going to be close. It'll be at least 7 or 8 points in Florida. So with Virginia, one of the problems is we don't know what the voter registrations are. We don't know if they have changed the way the rest of the country has changed. But you have to figure that they did. If you've got 30 out of 30 and you got one more observation, the chance is it's going to look like the other 30.
Yeah.
So early voting started in Virginia, not ballot requests as we had in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Duval County, where you say, I want a ballot, please send me one. These are actual lines of people lining up to vote early. And the turnout was off the charts. Now, the bad news is it was off the charts everywhere. It was very high in Fairfax County. However, it was off the charts in the red counties. Buchanan and some of the others had already voted at their 2020 level after the first day of early voting.
Well, that's a big change.
It's a massive change. The red areas are turning out like crazy. Now, remember, because we don't have Republican Democrat ballots, we don't know how many of those Democrats in any of these places voted Republican. We're assuming that very, very few Republicans are like these idiots that you see on TV. So I'm a Republican. I'm going to vote for Harris.
Yeah,
no
Bill
real
Kristol's
person
of the
does
world,
that.
yeah.
Liz Cheney does that, but
Liz
she gets a
Cheney.
lot of money for doing that. It's her only source of income. But anyway, we don't know how many of those Democrats are going to be voting for Trump. So I would say that Virginia not only is in play, I would say that there is a very good chance Trump can win it. Now, we always say, well, New Jersey, Virginia, Minnesota, those are fool's gold for Republicans, except in 2016, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were always fool's gold for You can't keep saying, well, we're going to cede this state, and we're not going to compete in that state. Pretty soon you're down to 5 states, right? You have to compete everywhere and act like you're going to win everywhere. And before you know it, you start winning everywhere.
Well, and if he wins, I mean, if Trump wins Virginia, he's going to win the election, and it's going to be pretty comfortable, I think.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in another state that, of course, that's critical, I mean, really maybe the most important decisive state in this particular election is going to be Pennsylvania with its 19 electoral votes. North Carolina has 19. I think Virginia also has 19, right? I think they all have 19.
Something like that.
Yeah, or really
Michigan
close to
18.
it. Yeah, and Michigan has 18. So, I mean, these are big electoral vote states. Pennsylvania, you know, has mail-in balloting that by request. And again, you have some encouraging data related to the request for mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, right?
Well, not just Pennsylvania, but across the board, every place you have these mail-in ballot requests, the volume is way down from 2020. Yeah. In some places, it's been down 80 or 90%. Most people think by the time it's all done, Pennsylvania is going to be down at least 50%, maybe 60% from 2020. Certainly, nothing is going to be above 70% of where 2020 was. The numbers just aren't there. So you've got that entails 2 big things. First of all, if you're going to cheat, if you're going to harvest ballots, you need to have ballots to harvest. And the ballot harvesting starts by the vote by mail requests.
Right.
People, the Democrats would go to nursing homes, get names of people who were incapacitated, people who died, whatnot. They'd go to apartments, buildings, and find out where people have just moved. They would stack up hundreds of thousands and millions of these names. It was a long process because they had the cover of COVID of over 4 months to do all this. And they amassed these huge lists, and then they spent their time filling out those names, requesting ballots, and then voting for those people who never even knew they voted. That's gone now. That advantage is gone. You can't harvest a ballot that hasn't been requested. So the fact that the ballot requests are down so incredibly high is one major advantage the Republicans now have. The second big advantage is that where we can see the DR splits, as in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, Democrats still have an advantage. They're always going to have an advantage in early voting, but their advantage has shrunk dramatically. Duval County, all of North Carolina are exactly the same, an 11-point shortfall, either of Democrats declining or Republicans gaining. It adds up to about 11 points. Some places it's closer to 19 points. And so remember, again, the third part of this is that many Democrats are going to be voting for Trump. So I think that Trump is in a very strong position in Pennsylvania. The word is that the Harris camp is looking for other paths to victory that would include Georgia and North Carolina. And if that's where they're looking, they're going to be sadly disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, if they're left trying to steal one of those states, they've got real problems in a lot of the others, and it looks like the battleground polls are now beginning to reflect that. My theory, after that first debate, and hopefully the only debate, was that Trump just now needs to settle in, run his campaign, and within 3 weeks, we're going to see the race settle down into a fairly small but noticeable Trump lead that is going to be really hard for her to overcome, because I think This is a change election. He's the change agent in the race, obviously. And eventually people are going to realize that and stop falling for Harris's propaganda. And so we had these new polls from New York Times, Siena. And of course, the left is outraged at the New York Times for actually doing, what appears to be a fairly honest poll. And then also from Emerson showing Trump now regaining leads in states like, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, where he has led really most of the time. And if he's 5 points up, as the New York Times finds, 5 points up in Arizona, that means he's probably at least 5 points up in Nevada too, doesn't it?
A little less. He's probably up. Nevada is strange. It has obviously a Democrat heavy voter registration base. I think they're up about 20,000 registrations over Republicans, whereas Arizona, we're going to be up 400,000 Republican registrations over Democrats. But Nevada is one of those places where the shift has been very significant to Republicans, and the Democrats are highly disaffected, especially culinary workers are attracted to the Trump no.
And that's a heavily Hispanic vote, right?
Tips, the Hispanic vote there. But what you have to remember, what your viewers have to remember, is whatever you're seeing in any of these national polls, Trump historically in 2 elections now, we have good evidence, under polls by an average of 2.1 points. Yeah. So if you see Harris up 1 or 2, she's losing that poll. Statewide, many of these have been off much worse. I'll never forget 2016, one pollster had Hillary winning Wisconsin by 11. That's merely a 12-point miss, folks. They had her winning every single one of the Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin states. So you've got to always factor in the Trump underpoll of a minimum of 2.1 points. It's much higher in some states. For example, Ohio, they have always had Trump at 4 points maximum in Ohio. One poll had him losing Ohio in 2020. Trump wins by 8 to 8.5 in both elections. Those are 12-point misses or 4.5-point misses. Those are huge. That's outside the margin error, outside the margin of fraud, whatever margin you want to use. That's a Trump victory. So I think when you plug that into places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Trump should take all 3 of those states.
Yeah. And, of course, last time in 2020, we had it was either Quinnipiac or Morning Consult. The Friday before the election has Biden beating Trump in Florida and 16 points up in Michigan, right? The Friday before election day, which, Michigan was within that much and Trump easily won Florida. So, these polls, particularly from polling groups like Morning Consult, like Ipsos, that they do polls to try to make news stories rather than accurately gauge voter attitudes. You just need to ignore them. Don't pay any attention to them at all. I go back and forth on anything affiliated with the New York Times, whether that's going to be real or not. But the results they've been getting in those battleground polls have seemed pretty consistent with what we're hearing from, the internals of both campaigns. And obviously, I think right now, Harris's internals must be pretty bad because now she's out there trying to convince Trump to do a second debate. And that's typically,
he said no.
Yeah. And he did say no, thank God. And I hope he sticks with it. I live in fear that he's going to make an unforced error and give her that opportunity on CNN of all places, which he's already done one debate, but that was with Biden, who obviously is completely out of it at this point. And
he didn't know who he was introducing yesterday when he had the president of India, one of the biggest nations in the world, and he didn't even know who he was. And so who's next? Who's next?
Good Lord. It's so embarrassing, such a humiliation for the country.
It is. But you have to remember, Democrats are incapable of being humiliated.
That's true. They have no sense of shame. Yeah.
You cannot embarrass them. You cannot point to hypocrisy. I don't know why our side wastes any time whatsoever talking about Democrat hypocrisy. Yeah. It's like talking about rattlesnake poison. I mean, it's who they are. It's what they do.
the whole political mindset is based on hypocrisy and misinformation. It's just anyway, that was just just another in a long line of embarrassing moments. Biden's going to speak at the UN General Assembly this afternoon, and that's going to be another national embarrassment. And he had his wife chair the first cabinet meeting in 11 months. He turns it over to his wife to chair.
Totally unconstitutional and wrong, but that doesn't stop him. One thing people could keep their eyes out for is any news whatsoever that the Democrats are starting to move money out of Harris's campaign to some of these Senate races.
Yeah.
Because over the weekend, we also had some really good, amazing news out of Ohio. Which is that for the second poll in a row, Bernie Moreno was up. Now, again, I don't think Bernie Moreno needs to be up in any poll to win Ohio. If he's within 3 points, Trump is going to win by so much in Ohio that he can easily carry Bernie over. But to be up, I think that now we are looking at a 52-48 Senate with Justice in West Virginia, Sheehy in Montana, and Bernie Moreno in Ohio. I think
it's a pretty tight race in Pennsylvania too, right?
It is. Is it McCormick is tied or down one or up one, depending on what poll you look at. I don't think he's been in the lead, but he's been tied.
He's been
again. A sizable Trump win there would pull him over. You're going to get the what the heck voters. The voters who show up to vote for Trump, and they might go down the ballot to the next 2 or 3 slots and, oh, what the heck, I'll vote for this Republican. And by the time you get to all those judges and dog catchers and city, commissioners and the head of Cactus out here in Arizona, by the time you get to all those different people, I'm not going to vote for any of these people.
Yeah.
So if that happens and McCormick wins, I think we need 53 Senate votes to have a true, actual working majority, no matter what.
Yeah.
And that negates Susan Tom Collins, as I call her, up there in Maine, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, and then whatever dolt that the Utah people foist on us as Mitt Romney's replacement. He's going to be fairly useless.
Yeah.
So if we get to 50 after those 3 and you have J.D. Vance as the tiebreaker, we're going to be in good shape to pass some decent legislation.
Well, you're in Arizona. The news has not been encouraging about the Senate race out there. I mean, if let's say Trump does win Arizona by 5% of the vote, does he have a chance to carry Lake over the top?
It will have to be at least 4, I think, and maybe a little more. She's just run a very bad campaign. I go out and I talk to these Republican groups all over the state, and they all tell me we can't get Kerry to come and talk to us. She has not yet found a second issue to the border that would allow her to really pull in a lot of the Bobby Kennedy supporters, like really heavy on crypto or really heavy on fighting the vax or whatever it is. She just hasn't found that second issue. And what they John Madden, the great football commentator, used to say of a defensive end pass rusher, if you only got one move, you got no moves.
Yeah.
And Gallego has so far been able to neutralize the border with lies by saying that he's strong on the border too. So she has not had any traction with any issues here other than the border. And unfortunately, and this is one reason I didn't want her to run. I love her as a candidate, but I didn't want her to run because of the loser tag. Once you lose an election, there's people who just will say, well, she lost last time. And they won't vote for you. Ask Richard Nixon when he ran for governor of California. Yeah. So she is in some trouble. I didn't think that Moreno would be a more likely shot than her, but it does appear that way. I think the guy, Sam Brown in Nevada, has lost. I don't think he has a chance. He's down by 10 or more in most polls.
And both of those races ought to be winnable races with the right candidate. I mean, they should be winnable seats. It's a real shame.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. There's nothing you can do about it.
And then you've got Hulk Hogan out there in in Maryland, Larry Hulk Hogan, who's going to be a rhino, but he might be just enough of a non-rhino to help get some judges confirmed or stuff like that. He's probably trailing. Again, so much is going to depend on how heavy I don't doubt that Trump is going to turn people out like never before. It won't surprise me if he crosses the 81 million vote threshold himself.
Yeah.
And that alone would be a victory of epic proportions for him to cross that threshold. Number two, to win the popular vote. And then obviously most important, win the electoral college.
Well, and the most encouraging thing about it is the dramatic reduction in mail-in ballots that are going to come about this time compared to 20, because the steal happened with the mail-in ballots in 2020. They were simply completely defraudable. States like Georgia and Pennsylvania, Michigan were not policing the situation at all. And other states barely did. And you had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of those things got counted without signatures, without proper addresses, without any real verification at all. And, I mean, now, and like in Georgia, basically these legislative hearings that have been held in Georgia have basically proven all of that was fraud.
And they've changed the laws in Georgia.
Yeah, and they've changed the laws
in Georgia in different ways. In Virginia, Youngkin said we're not going to count any mail-in ballot that doesn't have a signature. Pennsylvania, I think, has finally had its final answer there on the late ballots and said they're not going to count anything that comes in after Election Day. So the laws have been tightened in a number of places here. Robert Barnes did some interesting research and would find, for example, nursing homes within the same zip code, where one nursing home would have over 100% mail-in turnout and the other one would have like 20. So this is very clearly where they were stealing it. It's not the machines. In Arizona, you can't do that because we have paper ballot backups.
Right.
So and the counties obviously count the vote and send in the tabulations. So if you get a precinct that has 1,204 ballots total, and you don't have 1,204 ballots or votes in the machine, they would check that. You have a problem. They have to match. So all of these kinds of legal belt tightening, loophole closing actions have also made it now much, much harder for them to cheat. And then finally, and I don't know if you paid attention to this, but we've had 3 or 4 states, including Nevada and Ohio, Arizona till a judge changed the law again. But we've had 2 states and Oklahoma recently purged their voter rolls of dead Democrats and people who moved out of state and so on. Oklahoma chopped out 450,000. Ohio took out, I think, 90,000. I think it was about 90,000 in Nevada. So all of these dead voters who are no longer there can't vote Democrat now.
Yeah, and they all vote Democrat here in Texas too. It's exclusively a Democratic stronghold with the dead vote. So let's talk about. I want to talk about this deal with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Olivia Nuzzi, the reporter for the New Yorker, who apparently he was sexting him for a period of several months after they'd done an interview, and she got suspended from her job last week over it. I knew as soon as RFK Jr. endorsed Trump, I actually wrote about it on my Substack that, okay, you've done this and now you just better be ready, because any skeleton that's in your closet now is going to pop out. Right.
Right.
And so last week, I mean, I don't know. Does anything like that really harm the credibility of a man from the Kennedy family?
I mean, does it harm any Republican, actually?
Right.
And it's apparently going to cost Mark Robinson the race in North Carolina. He's not going to drop out, but I'm sure there's enough
Oh yeah,
holier than thou Republicans who are going to say, "Oh, I can't vote for a guy who did that kind of stuff," right?
Of course.
I don't see this hurting Bobby. And this whole business about Bobby still being on ballots, I think, is irrelevant.
I do too.
Because Bobby's supporters know what he wants. He wants Trump. And they made it very clear Trump is going to put him in charge of a task force to go after Big Pharma. And I think they ought to call it, they can't have it be a cabinet seat. So he would have to answer to a Senate, approval committee. But you can create a task force. Let's call it the Genghis Khan Task Force on drug policing and food policing, and put him in charge, and he can just go after these people. So, of
Isn't
course,
that a really dangerous place for him to be, in working directly at odds with the pharmaceutical companies who spend billions of dollars every year advertising on every news channel in the country? I mean, I think that's a really nervous spot to be in, and I admire his courage in taking that on.
Well, they're all in very dangerous spots. They've tried to kill Trump twice.
Yeah.
Today we had the letter from Ryan Baby Ruth, who just flat out said, "I tried to shoot Trump. I failed."
And offering $150,000 reward for anybody who carries it out.
Yeah, I mean,
had a bounty in it.
It's insane, and that every Democrat in Congress doesn't not only rebuke that, but excoriate any attempt like that. And in an honest society, they would say, if Trump is killed before the election, we will withdraw all support for Kamala Harris, and we will do everything we can to elect a Republican. That's what an honest society would do. Yeah. But once again, these people aren't honest. They're total hypocrites. So they're going to try to keep taking him out. And one person said, "Oh, we need to see rallies with Trump and RFK Jr." That's not a good idea. I don't want somebody in a suicide vest taking both of them out at the same time. After the election, we can put Trump and RFK and J.D. Vance and Vivek and Tulsi all on the same stage for a victory rally, but not until then.
Yeah, I worry about that kind of thing happening at these Tucker Carlson events too. You know, he's had events where you have him and Megyn Kelly and Vivek Ramaswamy all on the same stage, and I'm like, dang, for these nut jobs, that's a target-rich environment, and there's a lot of nuts out there. And apparently, Matt Gaetz on his or on a podcast appearance last Friday said he's been told by law enforcement that there are 5 gangs of teams roaming the country looking for an opportunity still to assassinate Donald Trump.
3 foreign and 2 domestic.
Yeah.
What we don't know is that Baby Ruth and this Crooks guy were the 2 domestic shooters. We don't know if that was the 2 teams there, but and they finally agreed to increase Trump's Secret Service protection, which they should have done a long time ago. I am still worried about leaks out of the Secret Service. It seems pretty clear that somebody leaked Trump was going to go to that golf course at that particular time. It's the whole FBI needs to be deconstructed and just eliminated as an agency. It is so thoroughly corrupt. It apparently, or Homeland Security, they don't know which, was the one that was passing the information on to the shooter, according to some of the stuff I've read. And so they don't know who in there, but I'd just say take your pick. It's probably any of them.
Well, right. Yeah. And this guy, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but Ruth seems pretty obviously like somebody who you would expect to, he has a profile that is a lot alike a lot of operatives of the deep state intelligence community here in the United States. And he's this guy that has no visible means of support, who's traveling all over the world to these countries like Ukraine, where conflicts are happening, and staying for weeks at a time, doing these this recruiting for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and things like that you'd expect operatives of the CIA to be engaged in. And his background is so similar to Lee Harvey Oswald's. It's truly astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, I give him the nickname Baby Ruth, but I hear in other circles his nickname is Lee Harvey. So
Lee Harvey, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's really stunning, and then you have to look at the other aspect of that thing that hasn't got a lot of discussion that I've seen, is the fact that we wouldn't know who this guy was were it not for a happenstance lady who was passing by, thought the guy was behaving suspiciously as he ran out of the bushes and went and jumped in his car, and had the presence of mind to take a photograph of the guy's license plate.
Yep.
If she hadn't done that, we would not know who did that shooting. Okay.
Right.
And I think that obviously was the plan, that we wouldn't know who did that shooting.
Right.
And it's really wild how blatantly obvious this whole thing is. And I really hope and pray Trump has retained some private security to, if nothing else, keep an eye on what the Secret Service is doing.
Well, there's another big bomb about to explode, maybe, and that is the whole P. Diddley thing. Which, this has been rumored for years by people like Corey Haim and Corey Feldman and others, that there was this massive pedo ring in Hollywood, but nobody will quite go on record and say anything.
Yeah.
And of course, we had Cat Williams do an interview about 6 months ago in which he said that if you wanted to be a black actor in Hollywood, you had to pass this test with various big names and wear a dress and perform certain functions, and that he refused to do that, and that he was offered movies in the tens of millions of dollars if he had done those things. So P. Diddley, I hear he's very safe. I hear he's being kept in the Jack Ruby room of the Epstein wing of the jail.
The Epstein wing.
So he's in very good shape there. But he better spill the beans and mail out all the copies of this stuff he possibly can to as many nonpartisan outlets that he can before he is killed, or he will be killed fairly soon, because it's clear that he has people.
He's being held at a level of security where he's not able to do that. He can't even communicate with anyone on the outside. He's in trouble. I don't expect there to ever be a trial. I don't expect him to ever survive that jail.
Nope.
I think it's pretty obvious what is about to happen to him. And it's mainly because his client list is even more shocking and contains a whole lot more names than Epstein's did.
Well, the names that came out over the weekend were J-Lo, the Obamas, both of them, the Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith, very, very big A-lister names.
Usher was his best friend.
And interestingly, over the weekend, both Usher and Pink scrubbed their entire X feeds.
Yeah.
And Usher said, "Oh no, it was an error." Right. So, and all this on film, folks. What you need to understand is that we have videos someplace of all of this stuff, because that was what he did. He made videos of people having sex at these freak out parties, specifically so he could blackmail them later, or use it as leverage to get deals and parts and who knows what. So it's all on tape. And whoever has those tapes is going to be one of the most powerful people in the world.
Well, don't you think that was what the FBI was really looking for when they raided his mansions?
Sure.
They weren't looking for evidence to convict him with. They were looking for those tapes.
Sure.
So that they could take
and again, if he's smart, you back them all up, you send them all out to various people who can protect you. And so they can't kill him until or unless they know that they have all those tapes in their possession.
That's going to be pretty hard to accomplish, I would think. But anyway, Diddy's in trouble. He's got a real problem on his hands, and he offered $50 million in bail to get out of it, and they just laughed at him.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think we've pretty well covered the landscape. I need to look and see, make sure. I know there was something I had wanted to talk
I will
about.
tell you this personal story. We were shopping Patriots History, the movie, the film, to some very important people, including one, we'll just use the term artist out of Atlanta, who is very prominent, has done a number of movies, has his own studio and so on and so forth. And I had a friend who had done a lot of business down there with him. And the word came back, you do not want to be doing business with XYZ because you will pay for it in a whole lot of interesting ways.
Yeah. Well, Epstein didn't kill himself, folks. And I'm just telling you in advance, Diddy is not suicidal either.
Maxwell's still
be
alive, though.
initiated.
That's kind of a surprise, right?
Yeah, I know. And they've kept her really in isolation, really quiet. You wonder how long they can just continue to combine her. Wait, she got prosecuted, didn't she? They actually had a trial for her, yeah, and didn't let any of the names be revealed, of course. So she's in prison and keeping quiet. And I don't know. I guess they realized they had tied hold the information well enough for her not to be a threat anymore.
Right. Well, we keep hearing, and there's just these rumors that this time around, rather than the Democrat October surprise, that there's going to be an October surprise from our side. And I've heard this from a number of sources. Nobody's very specific, but there's enough people now who know enough stuff, not just about Hollywood, pedophile rings, and all that kind of stuff, but about all the politicians in D.C. that virtually the whole government, it's like the Profumo scandal, if you remember that back in England, to bring down the whole government. And the question is, A, if this is actually out there, and B, is somebody going to use it on our side? I think the Democrats are out of bullets, and no pun intended. I think that they've used up every possible thing they have against Trump, every single slur, every single slime, every legal case, every assassination attempt. I think they don't know what to do now because they place so much on lawfare and they got nothing out of it.
They got nothing. And isn't that amazing? All those cases, and they have zero to show for it at this point, other than some extremely unreasonable jury findings in the litigation, the liability litigation with the crazy lady. What's her name? I can't even remember her name.
Letitia James?
No. The crazy lady who claimed he had assaulted her.
E. Jean Carroll.
Yeah, E. Jean Carroll. What a nut job.
Well, and here's something else to think about, David. Right after 2020, when the Democrats had the House, they put in all of these new rules and regulations and procedures so that nobody would ever try to do this again. And it limited the vice president's role even further into what they were allowed to do when counting the votes. Yeah. And they put in other, quote, election integrity measures to ensure that nothing like that could happen again. Well, what they have done is essentially seal their own doom. Because when Trump is elected, they are going to have far, far, far fewer tools at their disposal to try in any way to deny the his inauguration, the counting of the vote, whatever you want to call it. They're not going to be able to stop that.
Yeah, I just hope he has a big enough margin to where they really can't make any credible claims about any kind of shenanigans. I'm not sure.
Well, Dave, I wouldn't count on that. Now, look, if he won 434 electoral votes and there was one district in Maine that didn't vote for him, they would claim the election was stolen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had Democrats claiming that after Reagan beat Mondale in '84. They've challenged every Republican victory since 1980. And really, even before then, there have been some Democrats claiming a stolen election. So it just, they're gonna claim that regardless, but it's a matter of what the public will be willing to believe. And I just, it's if he can win, 350 electoral votes, 325, to make it such a clear margin that the public simply is not going to accept this nonsense, then maybe they'll back off and save a little face. But I'm not sure they're capable of that.
Well, I think in the wake of defeat, if I'm correct and Trump wins, and I've got him at 312 electoral votes now with possibly 320, but if Harris continues to collapse, he could go as high as 340. In the wake of that and a Trump popular vote win, I think the Democrats are going to fracture, and they're going to fracture over one side that wants to do the 2017 stuff all over again. Resist, 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 riot, 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 try to pretend that he isn't legitimate, that kind of stuff. There will be a large segment that want to do that. But I think there's also going to be a large segment that say, we've done that, we've been there, that hasn't worked. We need to fix the party, or at least appear to fix the party. And Rui Teixeira is one of the leading voices on this. And, you guys have to appeal to the working class at some point. And so they've got to try to figure out what they need to do to at least look like they're appealing to the working class.
It's getting increasingly difficult for them to do. That's the thing I think we can celebrate more about Trump than anything else, is the way he has completely changed the dynamics between the two parties. The Republican Party is now the party of the working person, men and women, blue collar workers, and ordinary Americans. And the Democrats are the party of the billionaires. It's not even arguable not even debatable at this point. And
the polls continue to show, even some of the bad ones, that he is drawing Black support. He is drawing Hispanic support. One I saw today had him at 40% Hispanic. I think he'll get at least 45. Another showed him at 15 or 16 point with Blacks. Well, he's really low with Blacks. That's almost double he got in 2020. And it would be a high for any Republican since Reagan. Yeah. And I think he'll do better than that. I think he'll end up between 15 and 20, maybe 17, 18, 19 points, something like that.
Yeah. Well, Larry, I think we have covered the gamut today. Let everybody know where they can find you and your books.
Yep, I've got a political site if you want political commentary 3 days a week at Wild World of Politics. We also do a lot of videos there, including a series called Globalism Then and Now that has about, 15 videos in it. I've started a series called Integrity. The first 21 videos were Winston Churchill. I just started last week part 2 of Integrity, which is Billy Graham. We'll end up with probably 20 videos on Billy Graham. The other side is the Wild World of History. If you need history curriculum, if you're a history buff, we have all sorts of videos in our VIP. Each of these is only $6 a month. And the VIP has 50 hours of video on historical topics, entire lessons such as Reagan, the American president, or individual topics on the charge of the Winged Hussars, or was Prohibition popular, things like that. So that's at the Wild World of History, where I also have a full curriculum in U.S. and world history in which I teach every single lesson.
Also, let everybody know, remind everyone about the event you're doing on election night.
Yes, we are doing a live election night coverage. I got so sick of Fox News and these other idiots. We did a live election night coverage in 2020. It had 800,000 viewers. And it's Seth Keshel, Ash Epp, and I will be doing it live election night. We expect to have 2 million viewers at least this time around. And you can check into that at DecisionUSAOnline.com, DecisionUSAOnline.com. And if you're a sponsor, you got deep pockets. We could use some sponsorships. If you want to just donate $5, we can use that too. It's not cheap to get Decision Desk. Desk numbers are not cheap.
Yeah. Well, man, thank you. We will be back here again next week at 10 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, and have another interesting hour covering all the, oh my God, I can't even imagine what might happen this week. Every week is a new world. It's unbelievable. So, folks, thanks for chiming in, tuning in, and we will talk to you all next week.